who have good sex lives aren't comedy writers.
For 50 years, sitcom man has loved, lusted and usually lost out.
We could see the depiction of sex in the British sitcom as highly tragic throughout, and yet we've been quite happy to laugh about that.
So, how has sitcom reflected Britain's changing sexual mores?
Nowadays, there seems to be very little limit as to how far you can go.
How has sitcom woman responded to the sexual revolution?
She wanted more excitement in her lives, which she didn't really get from her husband.
She took what she wanted when she wanted it. She just wants men.
Have we finally conquered our inhibitions? Or will our attitude to sex always be laughable? The heroes of British sitcom come in all shapes and sizes, but we've had more lovable losers than Lotharios, more mummy's boys than ladies' men.
I've learned a lot about sex from sitcoms. I've learned that it's wrong, I've learned that it's grubby, I've learned that it's not going to happen to you.
This is a journey into frustration. Censorship and scheduling have helped emasculate sitcom man, but the malaise runs deeper, to the heart of our comic sensibility and to the birth of the genre.
In Britain, when we finally cracked sitcom in '56 with Hancock's Half Hour, what you're looking at is a comedy of desperation, really. We dealt with losers. We dealt with people whose lives were flawed. And I think that was the same as their sex lives. Their sex lives were flawed. So the comedy came out of them not getting any sex, not getting any action.
Have you ever been married?
No.
Engaged?
No.
Regular girlfriends?
No.
Casual girlfriends?
No.
Do you like women?
Yes.
Oh.
The scene in The Ladies' Man where, you know, he's being asked a description of himself and he's reeling off all these terrible qualities. You know, that sort of sums up what Hancock was like. And you know, and that sums up the type of character that we've had in sitcoms over the last few decades.
Can you interest women conversationally?
No.
Can you amuse them?
No.
You know, whether it's Captain Mainwaring or Basil Fawlty or David Brent, they're all flawed, imperfect human beings, and you wonder if they can ever form a relationship.
Do they laugh at you?
Yes.
In which way?
In the worst possible way.
And the more things changed, the more they stayed the same. The swinging 60s were a time of liberation, experimentation and free love, but not on sitcom street.
It is fashionable to regard the 60s as a period when, quote, it all hung out, which all sounds dreadfully uncomfortable to me. But actually, I think that it takes the better part of the decade to trickle down to people who are not living in metropolitan London, who don't have jobs of choice, who aren't uniquely beautiful.
Just because a bloke in West London is having sex with his hippie girlfriend and smoking dope doesn't mean that someone at TV Centre is going to slap this on our screens. Things move slowly, or they did then.
Mostly comedy deals with suburban life more than urban life. There was a show called Meet the Wife with Thora Hearn and Freddie Frinton. A northern couple, entirely benign, sex I don't think even alluded to in any way, shape or form, let alone shown and or done. Occasionally it's called It, I seem to remember.
Here's your cold.
Oh, thanks, Freddie.
Or there was a show called All Gas and Gaiters. 4 men in a bishopric, as it were. Sex, as far as I remember, is never alluded to, except as a kind of, it's a temptation and I must avoid it.
In fact, a battle was raging for the very soul of television.
We saw a programme that started at 6:35. And it was the dirtiest programme that I have seen for a very long time.
But for now, sitcom sat on the sidelines.
The more serious dramas, the armchair theatres, the Wednesday plays, you know, sex is part and parcel of the subjects they tackle. But sitcom is always considered to be more family-orientated. It's more about getting the people together to watch it.
Most comedies played early in the evening for a family audience, and that was who you were appealing to.
The late-night satire shows could afford to take more risks. But even here, the it word dare not speak its name.
I started with That Was the Week That Was, and I did a sketch in which Lance Percival was the driver and Millicent Martin was the engine of the car, and everything was a sexual innuendo.
Change gear. Horn.
Innuendo would be sitcoms' shorthand for sex for the next 20 years.
I'm not sure why we as a nation like innuendo so much. I think for me there's a sort of familiarity with it. There's a sort of comfort blanket feeling to it that reminds me of the Carry On films and the comedies I loved growing up.
Do another double bit.
Kinky.
People from other countries see innuendo as something that the British do all the time, on television and in film, in the sitcom, but also just in kind of everyday lives. It's one of the ways in which we talk.
I'm not stopping.
Well, what are you doing?
Reversing.
Pervert.
But in 1965, one writer did engage directly with the sexual revolution and put sitcom on the front line.
To Death Us Do Part is perhaps the first adult sitcom. Johnny Spate's scripts would look at politics one week, perhaps immigration the next, and inevitably sex.
I think the people who complain mainly about sex are the ones who aren't getting enough. The ones who get in their share, they have no complaints, quite satisfied, well happy.
Till Death Us Do Part addressed the growing generation gap in our attitudes to sex.
Alf Garnett has this daughter who's young and hip and swinging. He has the Randy Scouse git, and there's this sense from the writer's point of view that over there, young people are living a fantastic sexual life.
Yeah. We was decent brought up, we was, me and your mum. I mean, I never... Well...
In an episode entitled Sex Before Marriage, the older Garnets come out foursquare against sex before marriage, thinking that it should be something that should only be kept within the marriage vows.
I mean, I never attempted to touch your mother until after we was married.
Well after.
Alf Garnett, I don't think he gets his share of sex at all. I mean, actually, I would love to be able to do a show with him in bed, trying to have it away with the missus. That could be hysterical, I think. Very funny.
Look, you want to read something, Sonny? You want to read something a bit edifying, something a bit educative. Educative?
By making Alf a spokesman for Britain's moral majority, Spate subverted sitcom's conservatism.
Mrs. Whitehouse, isn't it? Mrs. Mary Whitehouse.
Say a programme like Till Death Us Do Part. Brilliantly funny. Brilliantly written. But you see, he was the one that stood for moral values. But he was the one people were supposed to feel a great dislike for.
That woman is concerned for the moral welfare of your country, isn't she? The moral fibre is being rotted away by a corrupt television.
But the advances of the 60s could no longer be ignored, and one advance in particular.
The day is printed by the side of every pill. And providing she can remember what day it is, a woman can be quite sure whether or not she has taken today's pill.
I think the impact of the pill was that for the first time in your life as a woman, if you were taking it regularly and you weren't one of the unfortunate minority who had a terrible time with it, you actually had unalloyed pleasure without guilt. And I happen to think that was very important.
The pill would change the dynamic of sitcom relationships forever.
British sitcoms, before the advent of the pill, are entirely male-centric. The male character is the lead key. Women are right at the edge. They're people who tell him what to do. They're objects of lust, but we see it entirely from his point of view. It's always him.
You can see things changing towards the end of the 60s and the early 70s. It's Awfully Bad for Your Eyes, Darling is a show which puts some women together living in a flat share. These women seem more adult with their attitudes towards sex. It is the permissive age, and this is one of the first shows to actually exploit that freedom.
The librarian wishes to remind you that the following books are now overdue. Portnoy's Complaint, Lady Chatterley's Lover, The Sensuous Woman, and The Kinsey Report.
I remember that last one. It said that married couples do it 2.8 times a week. I wonder what they do on the 0.8 occasion.
It's Awfully Bad for Your Eyes, Darling was co-written by Julie Cooper. Joanna Lumley is one of the stars, and she's exploited throughout of it by wearing very few clothes throughout the entire surviving episode, which I think is something they did on purpose.
How'd you do?
How'd you do?
Would you like to see something else?
Something else?
Well, I could show you if you liked.
Yes,
Perhaps they just wanted to show that these women were less self-conscious and perhaps were at home with the attractiveness of their body.
As the pill, sexual liberation, free women up to take control of making stuff, of doing stuff, women are going, right, we don't have to put up with this crap, we're going to make the TV programmes, and this is what's funny.
What have you got there? Sex in the 70s. Trust you.
Live at Birds was a bit risque, they thought, sometimes. I tried to be risque.
Go on, phone him. After all, you've got nothing to lose. You cheeky cow.
There were sexual references, and we did have lots of boyfriends, but you couldn't really go into it in detail, or we'd be a couple of slags, wouldn't we? You know.
I did enjoy the steak. I did enjoy the wine.
There were naughty girls who lead men on, and then, you know, don't give them satisfaction.
So what's we're after?
I mean, no. No, Aubrey, we hardly know each other.
It did have an innocence about it, which I wouldn't write now, because it doesn't exist either in me or the world. But there was an innocence in the world then.
But by the early 70s, innocence was under attack, and the pace of change bewildering.
Have we become a more civilised society with less hypocrisy, intolerance and repressiveness? Or have we become less civilised, with moral standards undermined and young people confused?
Beryl, we live in a permissive society.
Not on the street, we don't.
Everybody's at it.
Not with me, they're not.
Sex detached from its purpose, which is procreation, and its condition, which is love, is a very horrible thing.
All girls are supposed to be crying out for it.
Not this one, Geoffrey. I'm the silent majority.
I don't believe that sex should be restricted entirely to procreation. Sex is one of the few pleasures that practically everyone can indulge in.
If Britain was confused, so too were its sitcoms.
The permissive society has its tentacles into comedy, so that characters sort of use the swinging 60s or the permissive society as a sort of excuse in trying to court a girl, or the other way around, as sort of, oh, come on, we're allowed to do this stuff now.
It's only manners, Beryl. Total strangers do it now instead of shaking hands.
The permissive society was now a hot topic in the most traditional sitcoms.
What are you talking about?
You don't think I'm looking forward to this orgy tonight, do you?
You have talked about nothing else for the past fortnight.
I've been trying to convince myself.
Terry! You arranged it!
Ah, yes, I know it looks...
You and Bernie.
Yeah.
Enid and I would rather that you took us to the pictures.
I know, on the surface.
You have been stocking up the drinks cupboard all the week.
Well,
you have filled the house with cheese straws.
But our response to the sexual revolution got tangled up in sitcom's other obsession, social class.
We got company.
Have we? Who?
Yeah, George and Mildred, they're coming with us. Sort of training. They're thinking of issuing them with new equipment.
Well, I don't see why. Their old equipment looks good enough to me.
While the permissive society was agonised over in the suburbs, over on ITV, blokes were just getting on with it.
For some reason, ITV was much more interested in shagging and nookie, whereas the BBC wasn't. It was though the BBC didn't like to talk about it, but ITV, probably because it had a more working-class demographic, found it funnier.
Inside of the bus is my pitch. You've got a cab. What can I do inside a cab? Well, use your imagination.
1970 shows like On the Buses, like The Dustman, all these shows were unashamedly about men who liked drinking and having it off. Which is odd, because the permissive society was very middle class. It was Alan Bennett and Malcolm Bradbury writing about university lecturers committing adultery and smoking pipes at the same time. You could only have sex with a woman if you'd read The Guardian, whereas on ITV you could only have sex with a woman if you'd eaten some chips.
But when sex finally arrived in the suburbs...
Bye, darling.
It caused a scandal.
In most sitcoms, the guy is a loser who, if he's trying to get a woman, probably doesn't succeed because that's where the comedy is. But then when you take a Lothario head on, when you take someone who's got a recognisable, successful thing, as they did with Leslie Phillips in Casanova 73,